invitation to give a talk to your research. And it's very nice to be here to give us a talk. So this is something which I've been involved in the last few years, really, looking at free sugars and health. This is based on some PhD work that my PhD student was doing at in my previous institute in London University, and the funding from this came from the rank prize studentship. But a lot of the work itself was performed really without funding, because it's all desk based. You know, it's using this very amazing resource, which is the NDNS, which is the National Diet and Nutrition Survey from the UK. So as Lana says here, I'm going to take some evidence which is against free sugar users, and also some sort of contradictory evidence as well. So to me, the evidence is not all clear cut that we should definitely reduce it, because some data shows no effect really, and it's all about is it free sugar itself, or is it just energy, and is it because it's you have these effects in epidemiological studies, but you don't see the effect in the clinical trial. So it's all very very controversial, actually. Of course, I haven't got time to show you all the evidence available, but I'll just do a snapshot of this. So what are free sugars then? Well, the terminology now for free sugars, this is the terminology from Sacken. It's all added sugars in foods and drinks, and the sugars present in honey, syrups, and unsweetened fruit juices. So the commonest and the ones that you'll be aware of are sucrose, which is present in foods, naturally occurring in fruits, for example, fructose, and high fructose corn syrup. And high fructose corn syrup is quite controversial. This is a sweetener, artificial sweetener, which is used extensively by the food industry when they're preparing their sugar-sweetened beverages and snacks. So the little slide here, I should use the pointer, the little hand. Hope you can see that, but you can see sucrose there, which is a combination of glucose and fructose, the disaccharide. This is found present, naturally occurring in fruits, for example. And HFCS, high fructose corn syrup, is basically a mixture of glucose and fructose. It's an artificial sweetener, but it has more fructose than glucose, which could be potentially important because, as we'll see, fructose has very different metabolic effects than glucose. So what are free sugars then? So as we just heard, you have our total sugar component, then we have our naturally intact sugars, which are present in milk. Well, typically the ones which are highest in the diet: milk, fruits, and vegetables. Then we have our free sugars, which includes honey, syrups, and fruit and vegetable juices. So the fruit and vegetables themselves, there's no free sugars. They're all just sugar, sucrose, sugar. But as soon as you process them and convert them into a fruit juice, even just doing this at home by yourself, by just squeezing an orange, you've processed that fruit and it's now classified as a free sugar. Okay. And also in this category, it also includes added sugars, as in refined sugars. If you look at the source of free sugars in the UK diet, it's very much age dependent. We've done all our work previously in adults. If you look at adults category, the highest source is sugar and preserves and confectionery. But you can see that also very important components and sources in the diet are cereals. As we know, cereals are fortified with everything. And also non-alcoholic beverages. And these are the sort of sugar-sweetened beverages that we come to see all the time, like Coca-Cola, lemonade, Fanta, these sorts of drinks. If you look at other age groups, children especially, very important to look at the children's diets. You know, their main source are cereals and cereal products. And as you know, if you browse supermarket aisles, that you can see all these breakfast cereals, and they contain a lot of sugar. You know, Crunchy Nut cornflakes, Honey Nut Loops. You know, they contain high amounts of free sugars. Also, they do also get their free sugars from non-alcoholic beverages and sugar preserves and confectionery. And it's also the same in the elderly. So this is a common joke, isn't there, that the elderly revert back to childhood almost, and they seem to as well in their free sugar intake, because you can see that the elderly also have a high component of their free sugars from cereal products as well. So it's very important then to think about the aspects of, or the main sources in our diet. And we'll touch on that later as well, because what we find is when we look at epidemiological data and other evidence, it's focused really a lot on sugar-sweetened beverages, because it seems to be a very important intake for children and adults. Now, so is it sugar or is it fat? You know, which one is making you put on weight? So this is quite a common idea. And it's always thought that fat was the main contributor to weight gain. And many products were targeted at reducing fat. And from evidence in the last 10 years, it's actually beginning to look like sugar is the guilty party. The truth is probably that it's a combination of both, actually. It's an unhealthy diet will contain high amounts of fat and sugar. So it's not just one or the other, it's mainly excess energy, which is the main contributor. But researchers and scientists alike, they want to find out, they want to put some blame onto something in this respect. But is there any truth in that as well? So if you want to look at the link between sugar consumption and obesity throughout the years, you see on the left here, our sugar consumption increasing around the age of the year 1850. And we do see quite a similar rise in obesity, especially in the last sort of 50 years or so. So you can say, well, yes, there is some sort of relationship there. I'm sure there's a very good correlation between sugar consumption and obesity, as we know. If you look at HFCS, remember this product from the food industry, you see actually over the last few years, well, I'd say few years, I'd say 23 years, the relationship between obesity and intake is actually quite good. It's run very well. But how do you then explain this rise in HFCS intake, which does not map at all to obesity? So it's quite, that's not contradictory, but doesn't exactly follow the plan that we think. So without going through all the data on free sugars and risk of disease, I'm going to highlight this quite a popular review article, actually, by Hugh and colleagues back in 2010. And this shows you that the intake of sugar-sweetened soft drinks and the risk of disease. Now, this data is for type 2 diabetes, but it's the same association with all these other aspects of obesity and weight gain. So obesity itself, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, dyslipidemia, inflammation, and cardiovascular diseases. So they're looking at the intake of sugar-sweetened soft drinks versus risk. And you can see that if you're consuming about 1 to 4 drinks per month, so 1 a week, so your relative risk increased by about 10%. This is increased further if you consume about 2 to 6 drinks a week, and after consuming over one a day, so your risk is sort of around about the 40% area. So it's quite strong evidence of this association between sugar sweetened beverage consumption and risk of disease. A lot of the evidence for free sugars is based on sugar sweetened soft drink consumption. A lot of evidence I'll be showing today is on sugar sweetened soft drink consumption. That's because that is the main source. So you need to remember that, even though it's sugar sweetened soft drink, the sugar sweetened are free sugars. So after a wealth of data, again, I haven't got time to show you all, but Sacken did a very good job in looking and reviewing all the data from cohort studies, epidemiological data, randomized controlled trials, you name it, they looked at it. And eventually, back in 2015, they produced this report on carbohydrates and health. And they recommended that free sugar intake should be reduced to no more than 5% of total energy. Okay, so that was back in 2015. At the same time, they also changed the guidelines to increase our fiber intake as well. That's a different story for another day. So what does that mean then? So basically, 5% of energy is approximately, for adults and ages 11 plus, it's about 30 grams per day maximum, which is equivalent to, like, people like to have something they can see, so to visualize, is seen as 7 sugar cubes. 7 to 10 years, it's 24 grams, 6 sugar cubes, and 4 to 6 years, younger children, it's 19 grams, which is equivalent to about 5 sugar cubes per day. So that's the maximum that we should be consuming. Of course, at the time, when this news story broke, it was all over the press. There's a few excerpts from various newspaper articles about the recommendation from Sacken that it should be no more than 5%. And at the time, the sugar intake, well, free sugar intake itself was about 12% of our energy. And so it looked as a big task then to reduce that from over 10, less than half that, to 5%. Okay, so going backwards then, just some information on how sugars are metabolized, so we get some idea of why they could be linked to weight gain. So a little bit of biochemistry. So when we eat, and this is a picture of the person eating here, eating a nice carbohydrate-rich meal, a burger and chips. Then, of course, you're absorbing carbohydrates that are broken down into glucose, and the glucose enters the bloodstream, resulting in high blood glucose. So high blood glucose is sensed by the pancreas, which then produces this hormone insulin. So insulin, as you all know, controls and regulates our blood glucose levels. And what it does is that causes all your tissues, your tissue cells, adipose tissue, muscle tissue, liver, to take up this glucose. and they will use that glucose as a fuel to provide you with energy. Okay, but at the same time, because all the glucose is going into the cells, then that will normalize your blood glucose concentrations back to a baseline of about between 4 and 5 millimoles per liter. So in some cells, it's used up as a form of energy. In excess, though, it can be diverted to form fat. Okay, in the liver, it's stored as glycogen, which is important because when we have low blood glucose, for example, when we're very hungry or hangry, I get hungry myself, so a lot of you may also feel the same way. When you're really hungry, you feel confused, lethargic, tired, and irritable. This is a state called hangry. So you've got low blood glucose. This is also sensed by the pancreas, which in turn releases glucagon. This is the opposing hormone to insulin, and this stimulates the breakdown of glycogen to glucose in the liver to release glucose to normalize blood glucose. So that is obviously what's happening in the normal situation. But as I mentioned, if you're consuming glucose and other carbohydrates in excess, then these can be diverted to form fat. It's also important to know, though, however, that glucose and fructose, which are the constituents of sucrose and free sugars, they're metabolized quite differently by the body. And this diagram somehow goes in a way to explain that. So glucose relies on insulin to help it to be taken up by cells of the body like muscle, adipose tissue, brain, etc., and the liver. So it's under some sort of control. Okay, whereas fructose is not dependent on insulin. It's insulin independent. So fructose is metabolized quickly by the liver, and it can enter the synthesis of fat. So it's not preferentially metabolized in the same way as glucose, which provides energy. It is diverted to fat. Yes, some fructose is converted to glucose and can be stored as glycogen, but one of the main routes for fructose metabolism to this conversion to fat. And this part of biochemistry really is the reason why we tend to find this weight gain with increased free sugar consumption. This has been shown by researchers many times, and this is one example of this. In this study, they give glucose and fructose about 25% of energy, which is actually quite a lot. Crossover studies, so they give their participants glucose, 25% of energy, and they give them fructose as application, and they looked at the differences in these parameters. So look at triglycerides, TG here. You can see fructose, very significant increase from baseline compared to glucose, which is actually the reverse. Have high amounts of LDL and ApoB. LDL, if you don't know, is the major carrier of cholesterol in the bloodstream. It's one of these little proteins. Significantly higher amounts of small dense LDL. These are these small dense LDL particles which are atherogenic, which penetrate the artery. Significantly high amounts of oxidized LDL. And so this is a precursor for atherosclerotic lesions. And significantly high amounts of remnants, which are breakdown products of the lipoproteins. So you can see here that through this evidence then that fructose does indeed behave quite differently to glucose in the body. And this increase in lipid status can somehow, you can see how it can induce weight gain. So high sugar, fructose intake can result in increased blood triglycerides, increased fat in the blood. It also can result in insulin resistance. So it can potentiate insulin resistance, which then can put you at risk for type 2 diabetes. And eventually, you're thinking about a shortened lifespan. But of course, the increased blood triglycerides, this can then induce weight gain. So it's not just fructose that will do this. Let me just make that clear. Not just fructose, any sort of sugar in excess, but remember, fructose is quickly diverted into fat synthesis, whereas glucose can enter central metabolism and is metabolized. It's metabolized very efficiently by the body, as we know. But in excess, it will result in weight gain because it's calories, it's energy. And some other studies have looked at the type of fat which has been formed through these free sugars. And so this slide, again, is by the same people, Stanhope and colleagues. They have this ongoing investigations looking at fructose and glucose sweetened beverages, again at 25% of energy, which is quite a lot. But what they found was, in this study, comparing glucose and fructose again, was that glucose, it increased total fat content, but the type of fat was different. It was more subcutaneous fat. Okay, whereas fructose, you can see, it results in high amounts of total fat production, but mainly it was visceral fat. That's quite important because visceral fat is this fat in the belly region, which sort of surrounds the organs and actually becomes part of the organs, and it can stifle the organs and result in the organs not working properly. And this is one of the reasons why we have disrupted function of the pancreas, for example, the liver in diabetes. And one of the programs to basically treat diabetes effectively as well is through these diets, which you probably would have heard of by now, with the Newcastle diet, which has been shown by Rod Taylor and his colleagues at Newcastle University, whereby they put in a very low-calorie diet, and this basically stimulates the reduction of fat in the insulin in the pancreas and the liver, and through the loss of fat in these organs, these people can become more insulin sensitive again. But this seems to only work if there's an excess of calories. Okay, so this is a study back in 2013, and what they did was they compared again glucose and fructose, but this time they did it over 2 periods of intake. Isocaloric period of intake, where it's just the same as the habitual diet, and hypercaloric, where the participants were allowed to eat as much as they want. And comparing glucose and fructose again, you can see there's no increase in weight or triglycerides or triglyceride content in the liver during the period of isocaloric intake, but when the participants are in a hypercaloric state, when they're consuming excess calories, you can see that both glucose and fructose cause this gain in weight, triglycerides, and hepatic liver content. So it only seems to be working when calories are in excess. Okay, so The European Food Standards Authority, EFSA, who basically regulates some of food components, were tasked to look at the evidence on free sugars and to provide a safe limit. Okay, so again, in a similar way to what SACN has done for when they decide on their recommendations, they looked at all the evidence available. And so they're more up to date. So they did this in the early 20s where SACN were relying on data up to 2014-15. And what they also found, in the same way as what SACN found, was a nice dose-response relationship between sugars in beverages again, intake and triglyceride concentrations. It's small but significant. Same thing with hypertension. So as you increase the dosage of sugar-sweetened beverages, you can see hypertension increases. And similar findings for both type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. So as you increase sugar-sweetened beverage intake, you can see this increase in these diseases. The effects are small, but they are very significant. Okay, so there are true effects. So this study also came out last year, and they looked at sugar-sweetened beverage consumption and weight gain, both in adults and children. Okay, so both in adults and children, they found that the addition of sugar-sweetened beverages was associated with weight gain. And they found that approximately 1 serving per day, which is about 330 mils or 12 fluid ounces, was associated with a 0.42 kilograms increase in body weight. So that's quite substantial, really. Importantly, when you take away some sugar-sweetened beverages from your diet, you can see the reverse happens. You lose weight. So this again was very powerful evidence for the role of sugar-sweetened beverages consumption in weight gain. So if you consume more, you put on weight at a rate of 0.4 kilograms per serving. And if you take sugar-sweetened beverages from your diet, you can lose weight. This is an interesting article which came out just last month, really, and well, month before, but it's very recent. It has looked at just beverage consumption. So they weren't specifically looking at sugar-sweetened beverages. They look at all beverages, and they're looking at the risk of mortality, and the population was type 2 diabetes. So they're looking at diabetics, very large cohort. And what they found really, again, is very good association, increased risk of mortality, all-cause mortality or cardiovascular mortality with increased sugar-sweetened beverage intake, whereas these other drinks were all protective. So coffee was protective, very effective really. Tea effective, and even plain water was also beneficial. And just to look at the raw data, it's actually quite interesting, very interesting. So on the top left here, you can see sugar-sweetened beverages, and as you increase your servings per day, you can see the risk of mortality increases. Okay, so just after about 1 serving per day, then your risk starts to increase. So there seems to be this period where you can consume without any deleterious effects to your health. But as soon as you increase past 1 serving per day, then the risks emerge. Also, they found an association with other artificially sweetened beverages. So this even works then, the increased risk with your diet beverages. So this is your diet-free, sugar-free beverages. Fruit juices as well. So if you increase your servings of fruit juices per day over 1.2, you can see, so you get this very small increased risk of mortality. Again, that's because fruit juices, perhaps the link is because fruit juices contain high amounts of free sugars. And especially if you look at smoothies, for example, I know they have this health claim, they can be equivalent to 2 portions a day of your fruit intake, but it's all processed. So they do contain actually quite a lot of sugar, about 40 grams of sugar in your typical smoothie. And then you have coffee, very protective. If you like tea, again, also protective. So great if you're coffee and a tea drinker, good news there. You can see the more cups of coffee and cups of tea you can drink per day, the better it is for your overall health. Even better than water itself in some degree, so that's good. Low-fat milk, of course, is beneficial as well, but full-fat milk is not over certain servings. And again, I can imagine that is due to the fat content of full-fat milk. So that was very interesting data. It shows the difference, nice difference between not just sugar-sweetened beverages, but also artificial sweeteners as well. So you need to be careful with those because there's evidence to suggest that these are not as good as they claim to be, just because they've reduced the sugar component. So EFSA also went on to, just come back to EFSA, after the EFSA study, they were thinking about how can we then relate this to a causal relationship, because it's actually a causal effect. And the answer was yes, they could suggest a causal relationship between sugar intake and obesity. It fit all the parameters. There was a strength of evidence there. They found a dose responsiveness to it. So as your intake of sugar-sweetened beverages increases, weight gain increases in dose-dependent manner. And so, of course, the plausibility is the fact that these drinks contain a lot of calories. So all the criteria used to evaluate causal relationships in epidemiology have been reached. Right, so going back to, I'll come on to our part in this, our little part in this story. So we've looked at the NDNS, and the NDNS is the National Diet and Nutrition Survey in the UK, and the data is being collected from 2008 to 2017 as a rolling program. The data is still ongoing, but haven't had time to analyze the most current data yet. So what we have then is data from 2008 to 2017, which comprise of 5,000 sub 5,000 adults. We've only looked at the adults in this case. We looked at the children as a different matter. So this is demographic data for 4-day food diaries. You get your nutrient analysis. You look at the food choices. And there's an array of metabolic and clinical markers, the usual suspects like triglycerides, HDL, LDL, glucose, etc. Anthropometric markers, so markers of body weight and body mass, and also blood pressure. So it's a wealth of information which is all freely available. And so the first thing we did was look at the consumption of free sugars in the UK. So if we look at over time, comparing total sugars, free sugars, and its constituents of free sugars, sucrose and fructose, there's not that much of a trend, as you can see. there is a sort of dip in sugar consumption around 2013. This was well before the sugar levy was introduced. And if you look at that as a percent of energy, remember, we're looking at 5%. That's the new recommendations, 5%. You can still see that it started off around 13%, just below 13%, and actually increased up to 15% in males, but has since come down after the announcement of the sugar levy actually, and is around 11% now. It hovers between 11 and 12%. So it's still more than double than the recommendations. So what we did then was we divided the population into those consuming less or more than the recommendations, which is 30 grams a day. And we found some very interesting observations, really. So we were expected to find if consuming increased amounts of sugar, free sugars, was associated with weight gain, we expected a higher BMI. Actually, what we found was that it actually decreased. So in all the participants, BMI actually decreased, comparing the two groups, which is very interesting for us as well. Same is true with glucose. Again, you might have expected that glucose would have increased in those participants who consumed more sugars, but actually that's not the truth. That was not the case. We found it was actually significantly lower in those who consumed more. We did find some associations which are well known, well researched. The increase in triglycerides, for example, which we found in males especially, more than females. So triglycerides was higher in those consuming a high amount of free sugars, and also homocysteine, which is another health marker. Again, interesting to see that it's different between males and females. So we went on to do some multiple regression, and really those health parameters in the green bars there are significant. So free sugars was able to predict triglycerides, HDL, and homocysteines significantly. And there's also some interesting observations in here as well. So we could see that, as what other evidence was shown, that free sugar intake was associated and could predict certain health parameters. So in the case of triglycerides, as you increase free sugar intake, you increased triglycerides, whereas the association was negative for HDL, which is a bad thing because HDL should remain high to reduce your risk of heart disease. We then went on to look at markers of unhealthy and unhealthy diets. So we choose healthy options based on the food plate, markers of healthy diets, and markers of unhealthy choices. And each of these models was significant, but different in different directions. So with the healthy choices, you can see they're all negatively associated. So the more of the food group, the less of the free sugars. But of course, those unhealthy markers, there's a positive association, and as you would expect, you can see the very strong effects with those food groups which are main sources of free sugar intakes. For example, soft drinks and sugar confectionery. So this just supports what we already knew. But the number of actual intervention studies is quite low, really, and so we wanted to try that out, and we wanted to try out an intervention which did not really control for overall energy intake. Because what we're finding now, a lot of the intervention trials always controlled energy intake. They kept everything at increased energy intake by 25% as sucrose, for example. But we want to look at it in terms of how does a normal consumer would consume these sugar-sweetened beverages. And that's they would be consuming the kind of lemonade or Coca-Cola on top of their habitual diet. So that's what we're trying to represent here. And so we did a crossover design where we give people either 0, 40, 80, or 120 grams of sucrose just in water as a sugar-sweetened beverage. And that's 120 grams is equivalent to almost 500 calories per day. 500 calories per day for a week, for just about 7 days. We want to see if this was acceptable to our participants more than anything else. And look at body composition. We found no change at all. We did expect to see some small change, even within a week. Almost 500 calories a day in the largest dose. That should be really equivalent to induce some sort of weight gain, but we didn't see any of that at all. So perhaps 7 days was not long enough. We did see some effect on blood pressure, so there was a significant increase in systolic blood pressure in the highest dose, but only in actual blood pressure data. So as soon as you looked at this as a change from baseline, there was no effect. Again, that does support some other studies which show no effect of fish sugars on blood pressure. And looking at macronutrient intakes, so what we did was for the 7 days of the trial, we took a 24-hour food diary every other day, and what we found was no difference to the intake of overall energy and each of the macronutrients. So 7 days of these extra doses of sucrose had no effect at all on the intake of macronutrients and energy, which again we thought was surprising. But then we thought, well, perhaps it's because it's been given as a drink, where drinks have no real impact on satiety, other than compared to, for example, a muffin or a bar of chocolate or something that would have a bigger impact on satiety and filling you up, that you wouldn't want to eat anything more. At the same time, I was involved in another study where we were looking at the effectiveness of a chronic tart cherry juice sugar sweetened drink on health parameters. And so this drink contained, actually, because it had 2 doses of it per day, it was just over 50 grams of carbohydrates. So that's an extra 102 calories a day times by 2. So that's just over 200 calories per day. But that's for a long time. It's over 3 months. Okay. So you would expect some effect on weight gain. This trial was mainly to look at the effectiveness of the tart cherry juice and the components of the tart cherry juice. So placebo actually was matched for energy. And what we found was that, yes, indeed, there was a significant effect, a small but significant effect on body fat and overall fat mass, but no effect on BMI of both the cherry juice drink and also the placebo. Obviously, the placebo is matched for energy intake. So yes, extra energy, of course, has caused this increase in weight. I should go back again, just to let you know there was no other change to any other of our markers. So from baseline, there's no change to insulin or glucose or to CRP or triglycerides, cholesterol, any other marker of liver states, indeed no other marker of health state as well. So no change to our primary endpoints, which were blood pressure, nitric oxide, and endothelial function. There's no change really in anything apart from this small but significant weight gain. So what we found so far then, so basically our cross-sectional data from the UK show that adults are consuming twice as much free sugars as recommended. And this is associated with several negative health parameters. And similar data is found in adults that consumed above recommendations. However, there are some inconsistent observations, which actually probably what I find is are the most interesting really, and something that deserves another look. So we found that free sugar intakes were predictors of certain health parameters, and that increasing intake of sugar on top of a habitual diet did not influence body composition, but there was a small increase in systolic blood pressure. However, doses of 20 grams per day, which is equivalent like three portions of your sugar sweetened beverages per day, were acceptable and did not change the habitual diet. So again, is it the form of sugar? Is that really important, being a beverage rather than a food product? And chronic consumption of a functional sugar does induce weight gain, but not greatly. So I want to finish off by looking at the UK perspective and what the UK has done to decrease free sugar intakes. And there's been two major public health campaigns by Public Health England to look at this problem. So the first one is 20 by 20, which was basically trying to achieve a 20% reduction in sugar 20% of sugars in foods by the year 2020. Okay, it's a bit of a mouthful for me. So this was a voluntary act. So basically, the government has asked food manufacturers to reduce their sugar intake by 20% by the year 2020, and they looked at 10 of the most popular snacks, and a lot of these are very important because these are the most common sources of free sugars in the diet. For example, breakfast cereals, as we've already heard, and confectionery, sweetened and chocolate confectionery. So what has that achieved then? Well, overall, 3% reduction in total sugar content of foods. It's small, again, significant. But there are some reductions in specific products. So if you look at, for example, breakfast cereals, you see a 30% loss. And remember, breakfast cereals, major source of free sugar intakes in children, so that's quite important, I think. 10% or 12%, sorry, in yogurts and fromage frais. But actually, very little change to the content in products which are aimed at eating out of the home sector. In fact, you can see that chocolate confection is actually a 10% increase in free sugars. So not really much has been done in that respect. Moving on to the sugar tax, so this is the soft drinks industry levy, commonly known as the sugar tax, and that is basically all products more than 8 grams of sugar per 100 mils. They induce this levy 18 to 24 pence per litre. This was estimated to raise about £520 million annually. Quite a nice little earner, whereas obviously less than that, they were exempt from from the tax. And what has that achieved so far? Well, there's been a number of reports on this, and of course, it's achieved in reducing the amount of sugar in snacks and drinks. So by 10%, so 30 grams per household per week, or around 10%, which is quite a significant amount. So no real change to the amount of drinks being consumed, but there's been a significant decrease in the sugar content of those drinks, and which is thought that should be related then to future health parameters. And actually, that could be the case. So this report came out again recently, this year. What they looked at is predicted and observed frequencies of obesity in children following the announcement and implementation of the sugar tax. So you can see here on the left-hand panel, so sort of in red, in the red line here, that's predicted if there was no sugar tax. This is the prevalence of obesity. You can see it's slowly rising. Whereas you observed, what they actually found was as soon as it's been announced, you can see the gradual decrease actually in the prevalence of obesity. But this only occurs in girls. So see on the left here, girls, the decrease there between the observed and predicted, whereas in boys of the same age group, there's no change. So you're all getting some effect, but only in girls. And so they're suggesting that the sugar tax may have prevented over 5,000 cases of obesity a year in Year 6 girls alone. We don't quite know what's going on with the boys yet, but it is doing something. So what these initiatives achieved so far? Well, in food, there's a 3% reduction in sugar content in 10 food products, but this is far short of the 20% challenge. So they wanted industry to reduce by 20%, they got 3%. And much less progress with food products made to eat out of the home. It's only, well, a lot lower, 10% lower, 1.3. In soft drink total sugar content fell by about 30 grams or 10% per household, which is very good. Sales of products with no levy attached has increased by 54%. The sales of products with a levy attached has fallen by up to 80%. So the sort of balancing each other out on this. So whereas one type of product has decreased in its purchasing, the others have increased. So there's no real financial effect to the food industry. So the percentage decreases from the sugar tax are much greater than those seen in the voluntary sugar reduction program, as you might expect, because obviously the tax is there, they have to follow it. So where should we go next, or where do I want to go next, really? I think it would be quite interesting to look at any differences in free sugars as food or beverages. So is it the fact that when we're consuming sugar sweetened beverage, there's no effect on satiety, so therefore it doesn't have no other effect on your habitual diet? Because you expect to see that with that amount of calories that you would see a change to the overall diet. Can we delineate the effects of free sugars from the effect on increased energy intake? Probably not. Chances are it's all to do with energy, excess calories. So it doesn't really matter, I don't think, that we can't tell the difference. Is there a difference between the different types of sugar? It seems to be metabolically, there's a difference between glucose and fructose, we know that, but it is very interesting. We'll wait to see what the future effects of the sugar tax on health parameters once we can analyze the data from NDNS from the years 2018 to the present day. And it's also of interest to engage with local councils and to increase the awareness of free sugar in the diet. And very importantly, to look at the barriers into introducing free sugar intakes. And that's it from me. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Such a very detailed presentation. And so now we open the floor for questions. I'm just checking the chat box, but you can please use your mic should you want to. Just raise your hand. Checking on the. So David says that any interesting new data has been presented. Just checking. I don't know, John. You can see the chat box, but
there's a question by.
There is a question, but yes. Abdi, please, see people. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your presentation, John. I just had a couple of questions, please. What is it about fructose that has been linked in with increased fats or lipoproteins in one of the studies you mentioned? What is it about its structure or how it behaves? And also about the visceral fat related to sugar, extra sugar intake. How can one reduce or minimize that in terms of reducing weight and things like that? If there's any recommendations on that front, thank you.
Yeah, well, to answer your last point there, Abdi, it's a very good point. Really, to stop the increase of weight gain is to reduce your intakes, because at normal intakes, then yes, fructose will be diverted in towards de novo lipogenesis, but not so much that it will cause significant weight gain, so the body can handle it. So fructose is metabolized, a lot of it is converted to glucose and metabolized that way, but about half of it will also be diverted directly into lipid synthesis. With glucose, that is metabolized, as you know, through glycolysis, and we only see that its conversion to fat in excess. So the differences are obviously metabolic, probably because fructose is a 5-carbon sugar. It's treated very differently in the cells than glucose is. What's the second part of your question again? Was about visceral fat. Yes, we don't know that. That's very interesting. Why it forms visceral fat, predominantly visceral fat rather than subcutaneous fat. I guess it's because of the location of it, really. So the metabolism of fructose is by the liver, and so when it's being converted to fat, the fat will be mainly visceral because it's in that region. I'm presuming that's the case. I'm not 100% sure, but I presume that is the case. So to prevent weight gain caused by fructose, it's just basically don't consume as much fructose. And if you are, then you need something to stimulate your metabolism, because it's been found that this effect of weight gain does not occur if you're following exercise programs. So, if you're doing something that's further stimulating your metabolism, like exercise, then you will not see that effect.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
That's all right.
John, I have some comments here. Olga says that thanks, it was interesting that obesity in girls decrease with the introduction of this low sugar law, well, the tax is referring to, but for boys stay the same. I actually had a question about that. I mean, did you find out what's the reason behind that? I mean, if you manage, has that been investigated or?
I don't know, but I think that probably someone who was looking at that very closely. It's very interesting that it's occurred even after the implementation. You can start seeing this cut off, this translation into obesity. So it could be that young girls are actually listening to the advice rather than young boys. They don't listen. I'm just guessing, but I just presume there's a difference listening to the advice.
Okay. So there's someone asking for the recording lecture, and yes, we will have these uploaded into the to the web page. We have a YouTube channel, the web page of the Center for Primary Health and Social Care. We have stored all our sessions. Chris says, thank you for the excellent new data and the interim conclusions about policy shifts. It's very interesting. And the issue of policy, I think there's a lot about recently about the corporate or commercial determinants of health. Do you think that it could be that sort of policy framework could help us in raising more awareness of gaining a bit more of a background and consensus to deal with the industry? I mean, behind this, I mean, in order to lower the especially the fructose one.
Yeah. The sugar tax seems to be working. I know it's early days yet, but there was some talk about just getting rid of the sugar tax. You know, I think through Liz Truss's crazy 40 days of craziness as a prime minister, she was thinking about removing the sugar tax as one of these, as an example of one of the nanny state policies. But thankfully that hasn't raised its head again, so I think they'll keep it, and they suggest that it's doing something, but it's very slowly doing it. If you ask, as the other data showed, if you ask the food industry to lower it voluntarily, they don't do it. They don't really do it. I mean, you can see there, and by the data, there's only 3% decrease. There was some good in terms of breakfast cereals and other examples, but overall it's 3% when they're aiming for 20%.
Yeah.
Even you could argue that sugar tax really, the effectiveness is not as much as it would have predicted.
I suspect. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think your evidence is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but it's I'm not a psychologist or public health person, but it's so much psychology involved in this, isn't it? You know, I mean, the public, they generally know what they're doing in terms of health, or do they? I don't know, but I think they get the message, but it's translating that message into everyday purchases and what is going on there in terms of their food choices. I think why they choose that. I mean, what do we need to do? Do we need to talk to the children more? Because obviously maybe the parents are guided by the children. I don't know. It's very difficult.
Okay, thank you. I think Chris has the hands up. Chris, if you'd like to.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you, John. I'm fascinated by diet drinks like Diet Coke. It's a bit of a rare vice of mine, something like that. But I mean, I don't mean to ask a question that may not have a rapid answer. I don't want to keep anyone waiting. But what are the probable mechanisms that associate a calorie-free drink and its sweeteners with similar problems? Because I'm dimly aware of the fact that Diet Coke, for example, will still have an impact on insulin and with sugar storage, etc. But I don't understand, the mechanisms for that. I
think in terms of risk of mortality and other diseases, I think it's more to do with the artificial sweetener itself. It hasn't been tested much, and I think it has other adverse effects that we just don't know about yet. So it may not be working by the same mechanisms as sugar. Sugar is working by the mechanism of just excess calories. Obviously, with the sugar-free drink, there's no calories attached to it, so it can't be calorie driven. So it's something to do with the product itself. And we heard a lot about these artificial sweeteners. Some are actually banned in America, or they're very tightly regulated in the US, whereas they're not so much in Europe and in the UK. That's the only reason I can think of.
That is a really fascinating answer, actually. Thank you.
Yeah, I think some have actually carcinogenic effects in high amounts, so I think you need to be very careful. I think that's why the FDA in the US has put more control over like aspartame and other artificial sweeteners.
You've possibly helped take one more vice off my pathetically short list of vices, John. So thank you very much.
I think I have a short list of vices.
Thank you so much.
John, another question was left at Karen Deep. It says, can we use artificial sweeteners as a substitute for free sugars? A bit similar to the discussion with Chris.
In the context of a sweetener, then I guess yes, because that's what they're designed for, really. Either personally, I don't think they taste very sweet. They taste very different from the sort of sweetness you get. But that's the point of them. But as I was saying before, I think you have to be very careful with them because there are some health risks attached to these artificial sweeteners. They're artificial, so they're basically, there is some toxicity involved with them because they're artificial compounds. So if it's artificial, the body's not used to them, so it won't know how to metabolize them, and therefore they will have some sort of toxicity associated with them. And we don't know fully the upper safety limit or level of these compounds. So yes, they can be used as artificial sweeteners because they are being used, but I think you've got to be really careful with them. Okay. In my opinion. I hope that answers your question.
I was checking on the chat again.
I think that was the last one.
Okay. If there are any more questions for John? I have one more, if I may. In regards to probably there is no answer, but it's just about is there any plan to move? You mentioned something in your recommendations about engaging with the council. Is there something that you're planning to take forward based on your evidence or?
Yeah, so I've been in conversation with Sophie from the London Metropolitan. So we'll be going ahead with. She's got some contacts within the local councils, so I'll be doing that. I really just want to see what their attitudes are towards free sugars, and so maybe we be able to get some sort of survey going about the London areas. See if there's any difference between ethnic minorities. I think that's quite important as well. And like I mentioned, any sort of barriers for reducing the intake. Is it because of nutrition knowledge? Do people understand the role of free sugars and they can be detrimental to health, or is it cost or other reasons?
There are some antecedents. I'm sure you. Probably aware we did one case study. It was conducted by a person who left London Med now alongside Eileen O'Keefe. It was a toolkit for takeaway foods. So they work with the councils and basically what they managed to do was to reduce certain practices in the way of cooking with oil and some other ingredients that were unhealthy ingredients, just to tackle obesity. And so I can you know, there are some previous work being done there in terms of engaging with councils and with the business as well. I mean, the takeaway business.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, because it does seem like this magical combination between fat and sugar. Obviously, like I said right at the start, you know, you can't blame one thing for this. This is a whole issue with excess energy, whether it's fat or carbohydrates or sugar. You know, it's
which I think
excess.
It was very well highlighted also in one of your slides. I mean, in all your presentation, the fact that we need to concentrate much more in sugar, isn't it, rather than carbohydrate or fat itself, because it's like the hidden story somehow. I mean, it looks as if, and that will be great.
Again, coming back to the food industry and what they do, you know, they try to pretend that foods are healthy because they're 0% fat or they're low in fat. But what they do is that they,
exactly,
in order to maximize the taste, they will just add more sugar to it. So, you know, you take with one hand what you're giving with the other. So it doesn't, to me, it does not make sense to reduce the fat content of a product and then just add loads of sugar to it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's a very interesting point, and it could make moving forward with councils, and it could make a good impact, I think. If you manage to partner with them and some businesses as well, that's brilliant. I don't know if there are any more questions or comments. Otherwise, Henry.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. John, my question is related with the feasibility of the intervention. Because look at the sucrose is found freely in fruits, and sometimes it might not be easy for someone to measure the actual amount of sucrose to take in. Unlike what you can say, if you're taking seriously, at least you can have an estimate. But I'm looking at the feasibility of how someone can really measure the amount of sugars someone can take in. So are there any kind of proven intervention where, well, at least which have been done on a mass scale, could be like community, whereby at least maybe in schools, to show that kind of showcasing and to pitch on how best people can reduce on the amount of sugar intake. Thank you.
So if I hear you correctly, then you're asking about sugars also in fruit as well, and the visibility of that. I think that's a very important point that you raised there, because a lot of the public and the consumers and public, and we get this issue all the time as nutritionists, whereby, you know, you're saying that fruit is healthy, but fruit contains lots of sugar, and that's true. Fruit does contain lots of sugar. Sometimes 25 to 30 grams of sucrose in an orange. But that sugar is not a free sugar because it's contained within the matrix of the fruit itself. So it's not classified as a free sugar. But as soon as you break it up and you sort of like juice that fruit, then you convert that sugar into a free sugar because it's released. How to increase the visibility of it? I don't know. I think that's a very important point to emphasize, the fact that, you know, sugar in fruit is healthy, with sugar outside of fruit is not. So I think perhaps maybe some more further marketing advertisements comparing fruit and sugar sweetened beverage or sugar sweetened products really may be a way to highlight that. I think people need to realize that fruits are healthy. They shouldn't ever limit your intake of fruits, really, and that it could replace say confectionery or sugar sweetened beverages. But yeah, it's a very difficult scenario. Sorry, I hope I answered your question, but Please ask again if I didn't.
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you.
Okay. So if there are no more questions, we can perhaps bring the seminar to a close. John, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's a great thing that we have it recorded. It's been asked already for people asking already if they will be able to access this. And yes, it will be in our YouTube channel, so you can listen back to or see a bit more detail, more data from John's presentation will be available. Okay. John,
thank you again, Yolanda, for the invitation. And thanks very much to all of you for listening and to finding it interesting.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience as well for engaging and for your questions this afternoon. Thank you.